虚会忏悔，一代一切众生惭愧忏悔，所有任妄为真，生生世世追随烦恼，效真烦恼，自困自残自害的恶业因缘习气与诸恶誓愿，惭愧忏悔，一代一切众生惭愧忏悔，所有的随生妄想、造作妄语，乃至形成坚固的万事的恶业因缘习气与诸恶誓愿。祈愿仰仗善事三宝及一切诸不可思议解脱境界菩萨摄持，速证妙观察智，善能如所如说观察所有妄想感觉业障，观察它的升起发展消亡的详细现象，念念知道它是那么虚无缥缈，知道它是一切苦的根本，从此不再被它牵引着毫无意义的追随去造让自己受苦的业。当下其能知情，当下其能做到，不随分别世间业果正生三者相续，三缘淡故，三因不生，心睁眼若达到款性自歇，即证菩提，并愿一切众生同步皆得。感恩善师佛于此堪忍世界真的慈悲陪伴，但是让快速圆满具足您这样的般若分的耐性，与我等此恶有情真，无负无着，逍遥自在，因机说法。但惭愧忏悔，亦得一切恶有情正生惭愧忏悔，由于欲尽起诸违顺，庆被爱心而生增极造整整业，乃至于上师三宝所备现其意，无惭无愧，无有恭敬，诸障所常能回生死。惭愧忏悔，亦得一切正生惭愧忏悔，曾无始劫至于今生，应攀缘行物为真实，或于前尘虚妄相想，认贼为我。使我原常以此本名，随真日行而不自觉，宛虚受轮转，宛入诸趣。老死菩萨头头就把舍命陪伴，谆谆教诲，却仍不知安得，直令生死妄想，恩将除报，虚愧无限，至诚忏悔。水深捞月万万年，生生世世追逐了虚无缥缈，劳民伤财，耗神费力，苦乐无常，颠倒无尽，没意思。感恩善师佛的狮子吼，祈愿一切众生皆能具足因缘和能力，闻师说法，因机醒悟，恒依佛智，念念觉悟，事事觉悟，时时觉悟，处处觉悟。誓愿尽未来给予善事三宝的善因缘，如同真如自性，永恒清净自在，坚固不坏，与诸佛及佛所认可的善知识、善因缘，如同真如自性，永恒清净自在，坚固不坏。诗曰：凡供养我的、尊重我的、服从我的，都是成就我修学、成就我菩提花果，恩德无量，功德无边。以此因缘，祈愿他们听到我所说的佛菩萨教法，自然产生具足坚固不坏的性，三障幻影所不能动；具足隐猛精进的念，三障幻影所不能动。精确微细成就其定，永远固化在80田里，生成智慧，自然契合正生意乐。打骂我的、抢劫我的、诽谤侮辱我的，都是成就我忍辱这个菩提正因，恩德无量，功德无边。以此因缘，祈愿他们听到我所说的佛菩萨教法，自然产生具足坚固不坏的性，三障幻影所不能动。具足隐猛精进的念，三障幻影所不能动，精确微细成就其定，永远挂在80田里，生成智慧，自然契合正生意乐。感恩善佛的慈悲摄受，感恩所有善因缘没有舍弃我，但坚决誓愿具足因缘和能力，速证如所如说，随教而行，是真与是同。惭愧忏悔，一代一切众生惭愧忏悔，犯病了还不自知的无名愚痴。祈愿一切众生皆能闻是说法，因机醒悟。于诸和尚、阿舍利所善能感恩欢喜的恭敬供养尊正赞叹，随教而行，处舍乔梦，诉说教诲。于正法真生起要想，于和尚、阿舍利所生起佛想，于自身所起病人想，于说法者起名因想，为其佛法不爱生命，于财物一波至于起老劫想，时时以往法师药，但这个病人坚决誓愿感恩欢喜的增医主服药，远程离垢的法眼镜，托念力福福归元真，八本名药，摩尼宝珠随意现，逍遥自在为法王，愿此誓愿等真如， 自然产生具足坚固不坏的性，三障幻影所不能动；具足勇猛精进的念，三障幻影所不能动。精确微细成就其定，永远固化在80天里，生成智慧，自然契合正生意乐。好，我们现在来学。今天谁愿意读呢？好 ，Maggie，请。请 Maggie，Maggie，你没开麦。
哦，sorry，大菩萨早，众位菩萨早安。我现在 switch 一下到电脑上，这个手机上。好，谢谢。复次，佛子，如来智慧无处不至，何以故？无益众生而不具有如来智慧，但以妄想颠倒执着而不正得。若离妄想，一切智、自然智、无碍智，则得现前。佛子，如来智慧亦复如是，无量无碍，普能利一切众生，具足在与众生身中。但诸凡愚妄想执着，不知不觉不得利益。奇哉奇哉！此诸众生云何具有如来智慧？愚痴迷惑，不知不见。我当教以圣道，令其永离妄想执着，自于身中得见如来广大智慧，与佛无异。诸佛大慈悲，令其除妄想。如是乃出现，饶益诸菩萨。祈请上师佛及一切诸不可思议解脱境界菩萨摄持，誓愿一切众生皆能闻师说法，因机醒悟，念念觉悟，事事觉悟，时时觉悟，处处觉悟。惭愧忏悔，亦待一切众生惭愧忏悔，久处生死旷野险难之中，独行无旅，周旋往返，无救无依，无归去所。劳斯菩萨头头就拔，纵得人身，亦是孤家寡人，冷雨飘零，凄凄惨惨，不知其道，不识方所，坚信妄想，单念烦恼，任由恶业习气，诸障果报，亲临蹂躏，甚至还以比烂比臭，未能把狗屎当庄严，把下贱当荣耀，打死不能改变，不能放，只希望我得到千万不能让他人得到。佛说如来智慧无处不至，无量无碍，不能利益一切众生，具足在与众生身中，却与佛背道而驰，高树我没有智慧的挡箭牌，念念熏修悭贪嫉妒自私自利，近则不逊，远则怨，自在演绎中山狼。虽闻如来诚实之语，必怀疑惑，摄食顶受，未免心谤。至诚惭愧忏悔，亦待一切众生惭愧忏悔，羞愧忏悔。祈请上师佛及一切诸不可思议解脱境界菩萨摄持，誓愿善能念念觉悟妄想执着的危害性，念念知道它是那么的虚无缥缈，知道它是一切苦的根本，从此不再被它牵引着毫无意义的追随，却造自己受苦的业。精确细致，无量无碍，吓得不敢追随，速速真实的好起来。当下既能知情，当下即能做到，不随分别世间业果众生三种相续，三缘断故，三因不生，心中言若大多，狂性自歇，即证菩提，并愿一切众生同步皆得。感恩上师佛的慈悲，就把舍命陪伴。祈请上师佛及一切诸不可思议解脱境界菩萨摄持，坚决誓愿，善能感恩欢喜的恭敬供养、尊重赞叹随教而行，除舍骄慢，速受教诲，成就法就是我，我就是法，无量无碍，普能利益一切众生。坚决誓愿，始终与师同行，常与师感应道交， 心见水月坛场，大作梦中所示。愿此是愿，自然成就坚固不坏的性。三丈欢迎所不能动，具足勇猛精进的念。三丈欢迎所不能动，精确微细成就其定，永远固化在80田里，生成智慧，自然契合，众生一乐。六根对六尘的妙处，为什么叫妙？因为自己认为好，感受好。但从究竟处，从真实处来说，那就是苦，因为我发病了。在发病状态中，我认为的什么舒服、不舒服，那都是发神经、发病，纯粹是我心意识上的东西，也就是我的一个妄想而已。它根本不是什么舒服和好过。啥叫入戏很深呐？演着演着就以为自己是个，那叫很浅。那是很浅，很深，就是这个我啊，我是 Maggie 呀，就入戏很深，就整个 Maggie 就是表现，我不知道 Maggie 只是个角色，以为就是自己，这个人就是自己，这个名字就是自己，妄想就是自己，他不可能是别人，入戏很深，就彻底不知道自己是什么。真正的我是那个灵性，入戏深了之后，就光知道怎么编、怎么导、怎么演，而且那个就是自己，就困在时间里的老人，实际就是个神经。我只是个演戏者，那只是个戏，还把戏也当个真，还把自己这个角色也当个真，而且啊，真到了坚定的认为就是这个，这是入戏很深的标志，也是病入膏肓的标志。牺牲自己成就别人，这个是最容易不被三障所障碍的。因为我就是个三障，我一牺牲，把三障都跟着牺牲了。观察当下的烦恼是什么，知道烦恼的败坏能力，觉悟烦恼的虚妄性，无非都是妄想。由此必然趋向败坏一切的好。心为根本，所以必须时刻的这些智慧现前。发现问题就马上惭愧、忏悔、发愿，恶习自然就会慢慢的转变。善根早日就慢慢的萌芽，一旦恶习好了，善根发芽了，修什么都必然无障碍成就了。记着每天去练慈眉善目的微笑脸，也就是说，先练出那个佛脸来，练出个观世音的脸来。那人家观世音菩萨是怎么样大慈的，怎么样大悲的，我们也去把它那个嫁接过来。如果嫁接过来，我可以瞬间的不用修，就有了佛的本事。我上与诸佛契合了，下与众生契合了。但是我一定要下与众生契合了，才容易与诸佛契合。因为同一个频率、同一个频道对上号了，是一个号。就像我的电视机调到那个台，就那个台，你想不要都不行。所以每天我们就开始对着镜子调台吧。一者，菩萨摩诃萨见诸众生，贪着我见，以我见故增长诸见，常为生死之所缠缚。是故菩萨为此众生修大悲心，悲因缘故宣说法化，为坏众生如是妄见。二者见诸众生心怀颠倒，常见无常，无常见常，苦见于乐，乐见于苦，境见不净，不净见净，我见无我，无我见我。是故菩萨为此众生修极悲心，悲因缘故宣说法要，为坏众生如是四道，如是四道。三者见诸众生心怀骄慢，时无有物而生物想，时无有事而生事想，以是因缘起七种慢。以是慢故增长恶法，是故菩萨于此众生修极悲心，悲因缘故宣说法要，破坏众生如是骄慢。四者见诸众生五盖所覆，以覆盖故心多生疑，不解深意。是故菩萨于此众生修极悲心，悲因缘故宣说法要，为坏众生如是无盖。Is that right? 五者见诸众生审六入海，眼取色相，耳取声相，鼻取香相，舌取味相，身取触相，意取法相，是名为审。是故菩萨于此众生修极悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，为拔众生如是审默。六者见诸众生有七种慢：一者慢，二者大慢，三者慢慢，四者我慢，五者增上慢，六者下慢，七者邪慢。 不达摩诃萨诸下慢者，自言圣汝；于慢者，自言最圣。我色圣乃至十圣。于增上慢者，菩萨语言：汝实非圣，不应变起圣人之想，为邪慢者宣说正见。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，待因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是骄慢。七者，见诸众生利于圣道，乐于世道恶道。是故菩萨于此众生即修悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生世道恶道。八者，见诸众生造恶道行，与无明属无明爱妻息所缠，不得自在。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是缠缚，处理恶道。九者，见诸众生亲近恶友，远离善友，其心甘乐，造作恶业。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是恶业，远离恶友，亲近善友。十者，见诸众生造作轻贪，与无明爱心无厌足，为是智慧。是故菩萨于此众生修其悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是千贪无明及爱，是与智慧。十一者，见诸众生我见断见，为是众生12因缘真智慧故，菩萨于此而生悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生我见断见，是与12因缘智故。12者，见诸众生行无明暗，对吗？我见、众生见、命见、是夫见、别意见、邪见、浊见，菩萨为师智光明故，于此众生而生悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是所见。13者，见诸众生乐于生死，与五俱因而生轻想。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未断众生如是三有。14者，见诸众生为魔所缚。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，未坏众生如是魔网。15者，见诸众生甘乐快乐，而不能知真实乐因。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，是诸众生真实乐因。16者，见诸众生求涅槃门，不能知处。是故菩萨于此众生修己悲心，悲因缘故宣说正法，为此众生开涅槃门。善男子，菩萨修悲，悉因如是16因缘。到这里哈。
是好，感恩 Maggie。好，这样子我们读一遍不一样哈，就是说你在读的时候，你最少要用心去看呐。然后呢，我们的心跟力印在这里的时候，那按那个《优菩萨戒经》里面，就是说我们这就是在造业了。心跟力，如果你同时印上了的话，你不就是在造定业吗？所以我们读一遍比我们自己听多少遍的那效果还要好。你看啊。Maggie，你听我们读完多少，然后你自己在读的时候，有一些地方你自己觉得，这次是这样读的吗？你这时候你才会用心去看，才会用心哈。好，那我们现在是继续熏昨天那一个链接吗？就是 FBI 在教肢体语言那个，昨天 Maggie 是说还要熏，那我们继续熏那个啊。昨天看了2集。今天看第3了哈。
Spies for the FBI, and today I'm answering questions on Twitter. This is body language support. At McFowl, and it comes with a photograph. I'd love to read at CIA's analysis of the body language in this photo. One of them is in charge. One of them is the subordinate. And their body language clearly is detailing which is which. Because when you're in charge, you can sit any style you like. This is your domain. When you are the supplicant, when you are there asking for help, your behaviors are more contrite, your arms are more restricted, your legs are restricted, and we see all of that here. At the Ulterior Kid asks, are there secret handshake identifiers asking for a friend? Yes. There are many groups out there that have all sorts of secret handshakes. Unfortunately, what happens is, and you run into this all the time, you go to shake hands with somebody and they've interlocked their fingers in a weird way, and all of a sudden you find their index finger right here on the inside of your wrist. This is your erogenous zone. This is for intimacy. This leaves a very negative feeling. Or you get these social aardvarks who want to squeeze your hand to demonstrate that they're strong and virile and so forth. It just leaves a bad feeling in our mouths. So are there handshakes, secret handshakes? Yeah, try to avoid them. At Nike Sandals Poppy asks, so a female leg shaking means what? She just cold? Well, a lot of times we see behaviors that are repetitive. I tend to bounce my legs a lot. Some people will twist their ring. Some people will crack their knuckles. Some people will play with their hair. All repetitive behaviors are self-soothing behaviors. At Vape My World asks, how do we identify bad people? Bad people are identified by bad behaviors. No one is bad until we see demonstrable bad behaviors. If they decide to assault somebody, if they decide to cheat someone, if they do things that are unethical, immoral, or illegal. At Courtney Renee asks, do men not know what nonverbal cues and body language mean, or do they just ignore it? I'm a man. Some people are better at reading nonverbals than others. Is there a difference between men and women and their ability to read nonverbals? The answer is yes, and it's obvious, and it's for biological reasons. Women bring babies into the world. It is the mother who spends the most time with the child and can look at everything from the texture of the skin to how much humidity is in the eyes to the color of the lips. That traditionally has been a female function. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot develop these skills, but from a pure biological perspective, they have that advantage, and that carries throughout life, but it's one that we men can also grow. So at P. Rittenhouse asks a very complex question. Ordering shawarma today, and the young lady wouldn't look at me in the eyes. That's okay. There's no responsibility to do that. I believe she is Syrian. Does eye contact mean something important in other cultures? Eye contact is both cultural and personal. In the United States, for instance, in New York, we're allowed to stare at each other for 1.28 seconds. In the Middle East, it's somewhere around between 4 and 6 seconds. That's cultural. You may find yourself in a place where it's personal and maybe you don't want to make eye contact. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on eye contact other than we all have personal preferences. Lack of eye contact should not equate to anything other than this is what the person chooses. From at Sayuhi Kimitsuka, who asks, why do hand gestures have such an impact? Humans evolved to be very expressive with their hands. 100,000 years ago, we were all in the African savannah. We were surrounded by predators, hyenas, lions, lionesses, these large felines. And we had to communicate silently, but effectively. We used our facial gestures close up, and we used our hand gestures to further communicate things such as direction, anxiety, fear, approach me, and so forth. This is part of our paleo circuits. We know this because when we study children who are born blind, then they've never seen, they use the very same hand gestures. Our hands attract attention. And in fact, if you look at your hands, no matter how dark your skin, you always notice that the palms of the hands are very easy to read. We think that this has given us an advantage because when we reach out, when we gesture and so forth, even in low light, it sends that powerful but silent signal. The gestures hold our attention. The gestures potentiate the message. At PPrag asks, what are power poses that I can use in Zoom talks, trying to improve my online presentation skills? So we've talked about power poses in other videos, and as Amy Cuddy made famous in her TED Talks, these have to do with expansive gestures where if you're sitting down, maybe you spread your hands on the table. If you were standing up, you put your hands on your hips with elbows out. Even if you're relaxed and sitting with a group, you put your hands behind your head, elbows out. These are territorial displays. But when we are in a virtual environment, all of that goes away because the camera can only see so much. And so what you need to do is bring them here, have them more in front of the camera. You're using gestures that are formed. So they look like, for instance, brackets or the letter C, where you demark and you set boundaries. And it serves not so much as a power pose, but as a confidence pose. And that's what really matters when you are on a small screen. At Madame Ambaske, and she asked, do you agree that every Myers-Briggs personality type has a specific body language signature? That's her question, and my answer is no. So great question from @Sonia the Freeze, and she asks, enjoying your Power of Body Language book, thank you. Going through it a second time, and I'm wondering, what the hell is up with close talkers? Our need for spatial distance is both cultural and personal. And so because each one of us has different needs, what I try to teach is to always start further apart. So let's say you shake hands, maybe you do a fist bump, maybe you shake hands, but you do it at a greater distance. And then from that greater point, you self-adjust. Maybe you move in closer, or maybe you stay where you're at. But we want to honor spatial differences simply for this reason. Anytime somebody violates our space, no matter how benign it is, we feel uncomfortable. It causes what I call limbic hijacking. It makes us hypervigilant. It makes us uncomfortable. But here's the whammy. It also limits the amount of time that we want this person to be near us or around us. So if you want to increase what we call face time, one of the things that you want to do is to have an appropriate space so that everybody feels comfortable. That can be cultural, but it can also be personal. Natalia MVP, and she asks, are microexpressions more pronounced when people are on Zoom calls, or are we better at noticing microexpressions because we keep staring into the screen? So let's start with a couple of things. Number one, let's try and get away from microexpressions because in fact, they're just expressions. If they were micro, we probably wouldn't see them. If they're fast, if they occur very quickly, then we say they are tachykinesic, as in the tachometer in your car. It moves very fast. They yield information, but very quickly. So we just refer to them as gestures. So as to the question, when you're on a Zoom call, what's going to determine your ability to observe behaviors actually has a lot to do with two things: the camera that's being used by the other person and the lighting. If there's grease or oils or dirt on the camera, and it's a low resolution camera, little lighting, you're going to miss these little behaviors to the point that something that is easy to see live, which is, for instance, the furrowing of the glabella, this little area of the head. If the camera is not right, if the lighting isn't right, you're going to miss these behaviors. One other thing that we've found that's fascinating is that where you think that maybe having a neutral face on a virtual call is the best thing to do, it actually works against you. The brain looks at a face and says, this is a happy person, or this is unhappy, or possibly a threat. And what happens is when a face presents as neutral, it registers negatively. So what we try to teach people that do a lot of virtual calls is to at least nod in acknowledgement, smile, use your eyebrows to express agreement or surprise, but avoid a neutral face, because when we query those participants and ask about that person who had a neutral face, they're always rated negatively. So we have a question from Had Malik 1, and he asks, why does shaking your head mean no and nodding means yes? You know, there are behaviors that over time become standardized because of social conventions. We know that for the most part, nodding, the forward nod is perceived as accepting, as positive, as saying yes. Now, there are cultures where this is not the norm, and we see that, for instance, in Bulgaria. There are times when somebody nods, what it means is they disagree. But for the most part, what the research tells us is this: as you go around the world, you're pretty much going to find the same behaviors. These things are universal, and that's why they're so reliable. So we have a question from Anil Bodwell, and she asks, how important is body posture when delivering speeches? I remember when I was at university and professors always spoke behind a podium. Now, look at TED Talks. There's no podium. Those days are over. If you're still talking behind a podium, it's almost anachronistic. In essence, a presentation now has taken on new form, because now when we only have 15 minutes, as we see with corporations that have gone from a 1-hour presentation to 12 or 15 minutes, when we go from presentation to a performance, then yeah, posture, presence, how we look, all of that becomes important. At Aaron Chase asks, hey Joe, what do you think about teaching preteens and teens body language to help them stay safe, and what are some of the things you teach them to watch out for? I think we need to teach children at a very young age about body language, in part because it helps them to navigate a complex world. They go into classrooms where they may be running into children that they've never met before. And if we can teach them some simple things, as when you approach others, approach them at angles, not directly, because they will perceive you as friendlier. That if you teach them that if a child is grabbing their clothing, they're probably shy, maybe they're introverted. What a great opportunity to welcome them and be friendly with them so that they're less stressed. Why wait till you're 30 years old to learn these things? Why not learn them at a very young age? And especially now, where there's so much emphasis on using media to communicate, I would say most definitely you can begin to teach children at a very young age what to look for, and they'll thank you for it in the end. So thank you again. Thank you for your questions. Hope to get some more in the future. You've been watching Body Language Support. People that are supremely confident, when they enter the room, they feel comfortable in that room. They don't hesitate to look around. Their gestures are smooth, but they're very broad. And that has to do with confidence. And for a lot of people, this is very difficult. I remember the great actress Helen Mirren saying, one of the most difficult things to learn as an actress is how to walk onto a scene. I've thought about that even in my career, how early on the difficulty of mastering that. How do you walk onto a crime scene? How do you walk into the public and demonstrate that I am confident and so forth? We can all work a little bit on our nonverbal so we come across as more confident. When we talk about confidence, it's so many things. It has to do with our posture, the way we present, how we look. Where's our chin? Where are the eyes looking and gazing? Our gestures are loose, but they're smoother. As we walk about, we walk as though we are on a mission. I'm walking out to shake your hand, or I'm walking out to a podium, or I'm walking to where I'm going to sit. So the less confident we are, the less eye contact we make. The less confident we are, the more reluctant we are to look about. You know, when I look at someone I admire, like Colin Powell, when he walks onto a stage, even before he speaks, he has total command of the room, and he does that because he brings two things into this equation. One is a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience, plus he has shaped and defined himself into a statesman.
We've got to think of America as a family, where every member of the family cares about every other member of the family.
I think sometimes people mistake machismo or theatrical displays of power as confidence. Confidence can be very quiet. Jane Goodall, here's this ethologist, very meek, very mild, and yet wherever she goes, she commands the room. One of the things you notice is they sort of have this command of themselves, and in doing so, that command transmits outward. The other thing that confident people realize is the temporal aspect of leadership. If you're in charge of time. I'm going to take my time to walk out. I'm going to take my time to answer your question. I will answer it in the pace, manner, and tone that I choose. And in doing that, we are demonstrating that we are confident and in control. Where do we get that confident voice? Where do we get those confident gestures? This is what's called socialization. We notice the principal who acts this way. We like this leader because of this or that trait. So I try to model their behaviors and say, this is a shortcut. And if I have to work on my vocabulary, that's what high status people do. If I have to change my gestures to fit in this society, and then that's what I'm going to have to do. That doesn't mean it changes me completely. It just means that this is what is required of me, and this is what I want to achieve at this moment in time. I think of Cary Grant. Here's an individual born in the UK, grew up very poor, and as he said in his biography, I became Cary Grant. I adopted all the behaviors that I saw from high status individuals.
Just think about that, but make up your mind.
And it is difficult to prescribe this, but one of the easiest things that we can do, you know, if you're a woman, maybe you want to model yourself on the actress Cate Blanchett or some other actor and say, you know, when they're being interviewed, how do they look? They look so confident. They look interesting. They have such a command presence. You know, we're not born this way. These are things that we have to develop and say, how do I want to be perceived? And what can I do to achieve that? Are there better behaviors that you can do? Here's a simple one. How many of you, somebody says, where'd they go? And you go like this. And as it turns out, this is one of the most hated signs around the world. And yet, if we just go like this, he went that way. We're already perceived differently. Little things. I tell the story often of when I first came into law enforcement. They said, well, you've got to get out there and make some arrests. And the first time I went out there and my voice just went really high. Stop, you're under arrest. That sounds horrible. And you have to work at having that command presence where you say, stop right there. Don't move. That's almost theatrical, yeah, but it's what is needed. So let's do this exercise. I want you to say no. Just go ahead, say it out loud. All right, now let's do it right. Say it as I say it. No. 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 Do you see the difference between the way you said it and this way? Did you notice that your voice kept getting deeper? But did you also notice that the fingers became wider and wider? The more confident you became, the wider your fingers were spreading. There's a big difference between saying no, stop, and going no, stop. This potentiates the message. But to get to this, we actually have to practice it. So let's do it again. No. Now go out there and teach your children how to do that.
I love sometimes selfies in the mirror.
One of my pet peeves is what we hear every day with what's called uptalk. Uptalk is where someone says something and then they end making it sound like a question mark. So it sounds like this. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent, upon this continent a new nation. My company has done research on this, and we've asked CEOs and we've asked executives, and some will say, well, I've gotten used to it and so forth. But when we ask them, does it really matter? They also, yeah, we'd rather not see it. I get pushback from people that say, well, this is just the way that I speak, and no doubt, but don't expect the same results.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
The cadence in our speech is extremely powerful for a couple of reasons. One, we know that when people machine gun a statement, when they talk very fast, we are less likely to listen to them over a long period of time. But when we talk in cadence, we are sort of held still, listening to what will come next. And I'll give you an example from that great speech Martin Luther King gave. As you notice with the cadence, I have a dream.
I have a dream.
And then he pauses. That one day.
That one day.
And then he goes on. And Churchill used the same thing. Churchill's notes literally would create spaces for how long he would pause.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
These pauses make people listen. And one of the things that we teach is if you want people to listen to you, use cadence to get their attention, hold their attention, but then look forward to what that next set of words will be. It lets them know at a subconscious level, this is the person in charge. And we know that they're in charge because they have temporal control over this. They're not in a hurry. So, a lot of times people say to me, well, does confidence look like, chest out, shoulders back, chin up? Yeah, that looks pretty good. But, a lot of times confidence is just sitting comfortably in a chair. And that may have more to do with how much space you control. It may have to do with the gestures that you use. You probably noticed that I use a lot of steepling. I tend to interlace my fingers and so forth. These are gestures that contribute to that communication that I'm trying to get across, that I am confident about what I'm talking about. So it's not just about puffing your chest out, or certainly not about talking louder or anything. It's about controlling my environment, but making sure that what I'm transmitting at all times is confidence. And that means I'm prepared. I'm ready to answer. I'm going to answer you now. I'm going to answer you effectively. And I'm going to make sure that you understand what I said. I'm here to convey. I'm not here to convince. A lot of times, people who are lacking confidence are trying to convince you of something. Hey, if I'm confident, I just say it once. It's this way and that's it. I convey the information rather than sit there and try to beat it into you by repeating it 10 different ways. Compare the gestures I'm about to do. It's about temporal movement, controlling time, so the person in charge has the time to look up at their own pace. The gestures are smooth. There's no hesitation. There's no quick movements. There's no jitteriness. There doesn't have to be. I'm in charge. When I feel less confident, I feel like I have to be in a hurry, that I've got to look up and I've got to answer right away. And there's a lot of preening behaviors, and these are detracting from me.
I was really shy a few years ago. Probably this is changing a little bit.
People are horrified to speak in public. I used to be horrified to speak in public. I still get nervous to speak in public. But here's some tricks I found that you might find useful. The first one is don't hesitate ever to say, you know what, this is scary. Be honest with yourself. This is unnatural. Number two, take refuge in knowing that if I sit down and study this material, I will know it better than my audience. The third thing I always do is I rehearse. It really helps so that the first time you hear it in a forum, it doesn't scare you. When it's time to do the presentation, one of the things I like to do is to warm up. I find a good solid wall and I will just lean into it like I'm holding this wall up, pressing against it just as if I were doing a push-up. And one of the things that does is it releases a lot of muscular tension. And because I'm doing it very wide, it makes me feel more powerful. And I need to walk on that stage as though it's mine with full confidence. It is only then that I look at my audience. And then I just take a second to get myself together and to begin. With practice, obviously, you're going to get better and better and better. Let's face it, people are not born confident. They're just not. We can become confident with the assistance of our parents who encourage us. We can become confident through our own achievements. We can become confident by going beyond our boundaries. But confidence is something that we can grow, we can nurture. I mean, I have seen people in wheelchairs that are supremely confident. I have seen elderly people in their 90s who are very confident. I've seen children who are holding a violin with such confidence. If you want to be confident, know your material. Know the information, hone that skill, work at it, have that mastery of things and of self, and that's how you will come across as confident, no matter what your station in life is. I'm Joe Navarro. I'm a body language expert, and today I'm going to be reviewing my own body language. So in May of 2019, I was looking at body language for Wired. Now we're going to be looking at my body language during that same time period. Most of my career I spent within the National Security Division. A lot of it had to do with looking at specific targets And then it was about, well, how do we get in their heads and how do we neutralize them? So there were some questions about my interlaced hands during this initial video. And for me, that's just one of those comfort behaviors that I use to help myself. Obviously, I'm not in front of the camera all the time, so it does provide a little bit of psychological discomfort. So oftentimes, you'll see me with interlaced hands, and many people do that, and it's just that it's a comforting behavior. I find it very useful, and if you've ever wondered what to do when you're sitting in a meeting and don't know what to do with your hands, just interlace your fingers. It's better than having your hands flat or your hands disappear totally from the table. We may think we're very sophisticated, but in fact, we are never in a state where we're not transmitting information. Oh, wait, go back, because I did something really weird. My elbows came in and my hands went out. And I realize that when I'm uncomfortable, I do things that actually reflect that. Now, you've probably seen me grab my hands together multiple times. That's dealing with insecurity. But here at this moment, what you see is I bring my elbows close to the body and my hands come together here. And what I'm in essence doing is being less territorial. And as I evaluate myself, I'm saying to myself, okay, this is something you shouldn't do. Even if it was just momentary, that my gestures should be fluid, they should be out here. That by self-restraining myself, I'm actually taking away from the message. And this is one of the advantages of watching a video, is that you can see yourself make this mistake and say, you know what, I'm going to be careful next time to make sure that I don't do it, even if it's just momentarily. In my 25 years in the FBI, it was a rarity that a person didn't eventually reveal what I needed to know. So as I'm looking at the video and I'm having a good conversation with myself, and I realize how often my leg shakes. And this is a comment that has been made, I've been made aware of several times. And I tend to bounce my leg or my foot tends to shake. And I do that subconsciously. I think it helps me to relax. I think it helps me to deal with stress. I've done it all my life. Why are we seeing it here? A person that lives in Florida, he all of a sudden is now in New York City in a strange environment, surrounded by at least 10 or 15 people that I've never met before, and that creates anxiety. And how do we deal with anxiety? We deal with them through the use of pacifiers, the hand touching, the hand wringing, the shaking legs, all contribute to that process. If it stands out and people can notice it, it can be very distracting. So it's one of those things that I'm going to be paying attention to from now on. So I just noticed one other small behavior, and it's a small gesture, and that is that I'm pulling down on my jacket. This is called a preening behavior. And we do that for a couple of reasons. You know, some people do it because they want to fix themselves right, they want to look right. I remember as an FBI agent, we always preened ourselves, fixed our jackets and our ties before the jury came into the room. I think I was doing the same here because I was very conscious of how my suit was looking in front of the camera, because they kept saying, make sure you pull down so the back of your suit doesn't scrunch upwards. The other reason that we sometimes preen ourselves is because we are physically touching our bodies, and in doing so, the texture of the material, the coldness of the material, in this case here, also helps to soothe us. In the same way that a small child will hang on to a blanket or a teddy bear or something, that touch helps to calm us. We never really outgrow that. Even as adults, we will always be touching things to help us to calm down. And in my case, obviously, to me, I can well see that there was a high degree of nervousness there, and that's how I was dealing with it. You as an audience, and even me right now, as I'm watching this, I realize I have forgotten all this activity that's going on, and I have to be mindful of what I'm going to say, how I say it, and what's next. Oftentimes, we look at a video, we see an interview, and we forget how many dozens of people were behind that camera, and that everything that is behind the camera and everything that happened that day prior to that camera turning on affects that person in a moment in time. The best that we can do is appreciate what's said, how it's said, and then maybe we can dig a little deeper. But we shouldn't come to too many conclusions just based on a video. And what an eye-opener for me as I'm watching myself here, and I realize that there were 3 cameras and 15 people at that moment looking at me, and how intimidated I actually felt. I'm a high-end introvert, so watching myself being in front of a group is very, very difficult. But I think it's something that we can now, with iPhones and other smartphones, it's easy to do, to watch ourselves, even if it's just for a few minutes, and say, boy, how can I improve on that? And so I think it's a useful tool. What I find in negotiations in real life is the absolute failure on the part of so many people to not anticipate what you will be asked. I'm Joe Navarro, former FBI agent and body language expert. Asking for a raise, haggling in a market, deciding where to go for dinner, interviewing a suspect. All of these are a form of negotiation. Every successful negotiation follows a pattern. There's the assessment phase, the engagement phase, and the transactional phase. If any one of these fail, at worst, you have a disaster. At best, this process takes forever. So if you were to ask me, well, when you were in the Bureau, what things did you do to negotiate effectively? Right off the top, I would tell you planning. Sitting down with, yellow legal pads and writing out, what is my objective? Clearly define, what is the objective here? What words am I going to use with this individual? If you're talking to a CEO that has 2 degrees, what are you going to use? 4th grade words? You have to think of the audience. You have to think of what potentially they're going to throw at you, and not just what they may throw at you, how quickly they will throw it at you. Somebody that thinks fast, speaks fast, you're going to have to be able to throw that arrow back immediately. So it's planning, it's coordinating, it's rehearsing, sitting down with fellow agents and saying, okay, you're going to play the part of the bad guy. And yet, I've been to, observer of many a negotiation where there's this absolute failure to think about what will be asked. And this all goes to, winging it, thinking that negotiations is just about the transaction, showing up and saying what maybe you've thought about, when in fact, the front end should be what takes up the most time. One of the jobs of the FBI was to recruit individuals who were working for hostile intelligence services. They would often be in the United States under different cover. As students, working with companies and so forth. But it's not like you can walk up to somebody and say, hey, hi, I'm Joe, and we know you're spying, and please tell us everything. So it was a matter of letting them know that I was an agent of the FBI, and how can we begin to at least talk to each other? And what I found useful always was I would find them on the street, and I would just begin to walk with them. And if they carried the newspaper in the left hand, I carried the newspaper in the left hand. By mirroring their behavior, they don't feel threatened, but then next time when they see me again walking next to them, they're saying, wait a minute, there are no coincidences in counterintelligence work. And then I can begin a process of engagement that is benign. So one of the things that I found as an FBI agent in just trying to get people to either confess or cooperate with us was what came to be known as the empathic model of social interaction. And the empathic model basically looks at human communications and says, in every effective negotiation, you have the assessment phase, the engagement phase, and then the transactional phase. We look at assessment as all the information that we can gather ahead of time, plus what we can read from this person the minute we come into visual contact and then throughout the process. And so subconsciously, by approaching this individual and just mirroring their behaviors, they're thinking, this is a pro. This guy knows how to do it. This guy knows that I may be under surveillance, but this looks natural. The engagement phase is thinking about, well, where's the best place to meet them? How? How many people? Look, I'd like to meet you at this bar, but if that's going to cause you problems or it's going to force you to have to report it, then you tell me where you want to meet. And then lastly, it's the transactional phase where at some point we now cross over into what is our goal and objective? I want this person to cooperate. But that's not going to take place until I can coordinate the assessment and the engagement. Then it allows us to move into the transactional phase much more easy. I'm always assessing. I'm always trying to figure out the best way to engage, and then what is the best way to transact. One of the things that I always looked at is a term we coined called chronicity, and that is how we use time. We know that, for instance, for doctors, surgical accidents increase after the lunch hour. Parole boards are more willing to be lenient in the morning hours, less so in the afternoon. So a lot of that has to do with both the circadian rhythm and blood sugars. And so as I look at negotiations in law enforcement, I need to factor when is this person the most able to resist me versus, okay, at this point, there's going to be less resistance. Negotiations are temporal. Whoever dominates time is in charge. So you call a little time out, let's go talk. That changes the rhythm. That changes where this is going. When do I remain silent? There's a client I've worked with, and he said, Joe, I can't tell you how many times I've used silence. In fact, I was negotiating for a building with a father and a daughter, and they made an offer that was supposed to be like their final offer, and I just sat there and lowered my eyes, and it drove them crazy. And finally, the daughter said, okay, we're going to throw in another $1 million. And he wasn't expecting that. He was just expecting them to say, this is it. One of the things that I learned as an agent, especially dealing with extremists, is that you just let them vent. And not just let them vent once, but let them vent over and over and over and over. And just when you think they're shutting down, you say, well, tell me about that again, or would you cover that again? And what happens is, second law of thermodynamics, entropy. After a while, they've grown so tired. They've got so much negative emotions poured into this that eventually they wear out. And it leaves you in a better position to then negotiate. I've talked with a lot of airlines over the years, and one of the things that we say is that when you have a customer, especially at the gate, and they're being very vociferous, let them vent, let them vent, let them vent, and then eventually all that energy is just dissipated, entropy takes over, and then you can say, look, this is what we can do for you, and that's all. One of the most difficult cases that I ever had involved a man. He was in his late 30s, and he was a pedophile. We knew there were at least 2 photographs of what he had done, but we knew that these individuals collected a lot more. And the question was, number 1, where was it? Number 2, would he cooperate with us? And number 3, would he confess to all these crimes? And the difficulty was, when we assessed this individual, he seemed like a nice guy in the sense that if you ran into him on the street, you wouldn't perceive him as being a pedophile. But at the same time, I was assessing myself, and that was how angry I was that I was sitting with this individual. So I had my emotions to deal with, but I have to negotiate with him. I have to get this information out of him somehow. And to do so, I had to go through that process of assessing him. He says he's a churchgoer, okay? He says that he studied and graduated from high school and so forth. So I'm building up all these things that I can at least attach some humanity to. How to engage him became immensely difficult. I have to remain even and get the information out of him. And then I have to be careful about what language I use, because if I say the wrong word, such as girl or child, he may just all of a sudden rear up and shut down. So it's about proceeding incrementally, constantly assessing him, watching his breathing rate, watching his blink rate, watching how often he touched his neck or he looked at me. Were his hands flat, palm down on his knees, or were his fingers gathered up? And after an hour, I'm understanding him better. We're now establishing communications more effectively. And I said, let me tell you about my situation. I'm a father. I'm also an agent. I'm not going to go away. I have people that I report to. And finally, I said to him, look, I'm probably the only guy in this town that doesn't hate you right now. There's 1,000 people out here that would string you up right now. But I'm talking to you. I'm listening to you. And in doing that, he understood where I was coming from. No badge, no gun, no authority figure, just this is who I am. And then he explained his position. My life is ruined. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to go to prison, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, most likely. Now we've established who we are as humans. And then I said, well, the first thing you could do is be helpful. You know, be helpful to me. Forget the U.S. attorney. Forget the prosecutors. I need this. And now it's personal. And so he immediately told me where the rest of the material was. Now, is this earth-shattering? Does it save a nation state? No. But I look at that as one of the most important cases I ever worked. And I attribute that success really not to myself, but to this model that in some ways it's really perfect.
我们今天时间又到了，感恩大家。然后今天我们一口气看这么多，会不会有点多了？ 是不是要放慢一点速度来看呢？有点哈，有点多啊。但他说的那些真的都非常的这样，就是他平时呢是否是在教我们嘛？就说我们要真诚，那就说为什么我们说不出好话？因为我们没一个好心，没一个好心肯定就说不出好话嘛。但如果是说我们是以法相应的时候呢，有的时候我们人跟人之间的沟通交流了，哪怕错了，哪怕结结巴巴，但是人家感受到的是真诚的。那与佛法相应的时候，那你就算说错了，人家看着他还是接受，他明白你的意思，能感受到你的心意。但如果是说心坏，是以烦恼心，是立足点、出发点是站在烦恼上面，不管你话讲得多好，讲得多动听，那人家听来都是一个败坏相。也就是说，我们开口，为什么我们一开口就所谓一言兴邦，一言上邦，一言兴邦？那我们立足在哪里？然后他这里呢，你知道这个阿布比亚呢，他是在教怎么样去跟人打交道，你看他真的他接触到的那些都是非常非常非常，就是比如说要去跟人家说出要把人家的一些情况要拿出来了，掏出来了，审讯也好，做什么也好。他那些的话，我们是接触不到的，就真的是很，就是就像他说他问话一样，他从一句话里面他说没有人没有给到他想要的东西，就是从你的肢体语言，不管你说不说我，反正你只要你在那里动了起心动念，他都能抓住到信息。然后，那我们自己就是说，我们自己是不是点点滴滴，发现让人家抓住的都是我们的正念。所以，我们只要心里面是正念的时候，就以不变应万变。我们自己心里面是正念的时候，那就不会入心机了。所以就是左腹长了，右迷惑呀，千定在入心机，一开口就入心机了，一举手投足就入心机了。那我们自己怎么样呢？只要我们心里面是正念，那我们不管怎么样动都好，人家抓住的都是正念，人家接收到的信息都是正念。那别人那些的话呢，有的时候人家罗生门的时候，那我们学到多少是多少呢？就他嘴巴说的，跟他身体的肢体语言是不一致的，所以我们经常说别扭别扭，就是扭的，心里面是这样想，然后表现出来是这样子的一个动作，那不是叫别扭吗？就扭着了，扭着了，人家看着真的就叫别扭。好，我们这些真的是浩瀚啊，不管世间法也好，出世间法也好。我们确实是要学的东西挺多，愿我们都能像佛一样如佛暗指，海映发光。因为这些全都是智慧，就像我们在学问你好那些样，师傅说这些都是智慧，因为立足点是在真正上面，处处说真正。我们去真正别人的时候，那就是智慧了。我们这些点点滴滴会了就是智慧，不会那就是没有智慧，甚至叫失智。所以现在我们就在智慧这一块要建立起来，正确的智慧这块要建立起来，并且还去用。是不是说我们知道了不去用就是没有用，没有用越不用就越没有用，越没用就是个没有用的人了。所以我们学到了就要去用。好，感恩大家。感恩。